I was gonna ask, did anybody take the test this weekend? How did you think it went?
English and math are easy.
Reading, science were more difficult?
Yeah.
See, weird. Everybody's telling their own thing because
I
one
haven't
of
heard the
stu-
same answer yet.
one of the students said that the math was, the questions that were easy were very easy, but the hard ones were very hard.
Yeah, that's what my one-on-one student said too. Same thing.
And then they said one passage in science was one of the hardest they have seen.
Science, I've heard all hard things about. That's the only passage I've heard consistent stuff.
And then English, everybody seems to be saying it was easy.
Pretty
so.
easy. When you have the best tutor, it's pretty easy.
Oh, jeez.
It's pretty easy. It's gonna be easy.
I did a 36 weekend.
We'll get one. Did anybody online take the test on Saturday? Yesterday? That's literally yesterday. Wow. Yeah, how did you think it went?
Pretty good.
Kind of same comments, like which sections you think were hard, which were easy, or were they all one or the other?
I think math was pretty hard, but
Yeah.
this is also my first time taking it, so I don't really know.
Yeah. I mean, that's fine. That's kind of what we've been hearing for the most part, that the hard questions on math were pretty hard, but yeah, did either of you struggle with time at all? Did you feel okay on time?
Yeah.
For the most part, yeah. Any that you felt like time was
Definitely just reading and science.
reading? Yeah. I mean, that's typical, right? Reading and science are meant to be like super time constraint tests on purpose, so it makes sense. But good to hear that you didn't have trouble in the other two, because like for the most part, I don't talk too much about timing in English like through my classes, just because people don't tend to struggle with time. And when we do get to practice, I'll offer up some strategies for people, like if you do have any time struggles. But for the most part, in my section, we don't tend to see that very much. But yeah, reading and science is like super common. They're so short, and it's all about just like, there's a lot of information you're gonna have to skip over. If you try to read everything in those things, it's just never gonna happen, right? So a lot of the times you have to skip over stuff, which kind of sucks. But it's good to hear two people had pretty decent experiences with that test. Everything I've heard so far has been positive, so always feel free when you get scores, if you're like confused about anything, or like if you get a packet back you don't know the answers, you can always text either of us or any of the tutors in our group chat. I think you should have all of our numbers now on WhatsApp, so feel free at any time to ask about anything. It's completely fine. We'd rather do that than anything else. So okay, so last time I was here, we started doing punctuation. We covered all of the comma rules and all of the colon rules. Today, I want to continue with that, pretty much finish up all of the punctuation. And there's only basically four other marks that we have to go over at this point. There's semicolon, is there four? Semicolons, apostrophes, dashes, and hyphens. Yeah, four more. There won't be as many rules as we had for commas, because there's going to be a lot of commas on this test. There's going to be a ton of them. So that's why I spend the most time with that. Give you a lot of rules. These ones are much less extensive. And same thing like I said last time. It's super beneficial for you guys to just kind of like note down all of these and then just keep kind of like following along. Not so much studying. Don't think that really does a ton for you. But just remembering these rules and knowing how to use them quickly will save you a ton of time, and you won't have to leave easier. Again, like I said last time, they're not easy, but easier questions on the board. We want to get these free points as much as we can. So we'll go through, kind of continue with the list we had last time. So we finished colons. Let's go on to semicolons. Semicolons are what you're going to use to make a winky face on your phone for the most part. Looks like a comma and a period kind of stacked on top of each other like that. There's really only two uses for this thing, and one of them is significantly more common than the other. I've only known of one rule when I took the test. The first time I took the test, I got one question wrong on the English test, and it was a semicolon rule I had never heard of. Luckily, at the time, they still scored it, like, pretty friendly. So I still was like, I got a perfect score, but didn't get all the questions. And this is why I teach this rule now, because I didn't even know it was a thing. So the second rule here will be something that you're probably not going to see, but I'm just going to leave it out there because I've had personal experience with it, and I was surprised to see that it's actually a thing. So the first one is the one I'm assuming you guys know about, like from your school, your English classes, maybe your general understanding of semicolons if you have any background, would be that they separate independent clauses. That's not useful. Independent luckily they don't test spelling on this test, so if you're like me and have trouble spelling words, it's not really a big deal. Okay, so I also forgot to write the word clauses. We're off to a good start here. Okay, the separate independent clauses. And that's basically the same thing as a period, right? If you remember, we talked about colons also having this function, and obviously periods separate independent clauses too. So this is something that's kind of redundant. You already have multiple ways of doing this. So the way I think of this rule, I won't always think of it as separate independent clauses. I would think of this as just use it like a period. So for example, if you set up two independent clauses, chocolate milk, okay, here's two independent clauses. I like chocolate milk, she likes regular milk. Two independent clauses. You can do a lot of different things, right, with how to punctuate this thing. The only difference when you use semicolons is that you have to not capitalize that. So you can put a semicolon here in between the two clauses, and that's a totally grammatically sound sentence. Does that make sense? It's pretty self-explanatory. Just pretend it's a period is kind of what you're doing here. Now I want to give you guys a situation. Let's say there's a question on the test that's asking, okay, it's number 3, and it's asking about that situation right there. And they're giving you some options. So for number 3, you could either, come on in, you're good. You could either answer A is a milk and then semicolon, B is milk period, C is something else, milk colon, D is, I don't know. We're going to vote on this one as a class here in a minute. So your options are, my handwriting looks awful up there, sorry guys. A is milk semicolon, B is milk period, C is milk colon, and D is, I don't know. I'll give you guys a second to think about it. Okay, does everyone have an answer they think they want to go with? I need everyone to vote. It's totally okay if you're wrong, but please vote. Zoom, you guys can just hit the little icon or shout out, I don't really care. Okay, starting with A. Who thinks it's A? Okay. Who thinks it's B? Okay, a few people. Who thinks it's C? Okay, does anyone think D? Okay, I, of course, tricked you on purpose. I'm so sorry. It is actually D here, because why? What happens when we're taking the English test? Are we editors, authors? What are we supposed to be? We're editors, right? And what authority does an editor have to make a stylistic choice? None, right? We're not worrying about stylistic choices. That's an author's job, not an editor's job. So here, both of these are grammatically sound, right? And this one too, to an extent, but we'll leave that for now. Both of these are grammatically sound, right? You can say this, I like chocolate milk, semicolon, or I like chocolate milk, period. They both are grammatically sound. So for that reason, you as the editor have to say, I don't know, it can't be either of those, because how do I choose one over the other? So the reason someone would use a semicolon is if they feel that these two clauses are very connected. But who are you to judge that, right? For the most part here, we're making objective choices, not subjective choices. And there will be questions where they'll prompt you subjective things, but they'll tell you, they're asking you to make that type of inference. Here it's not. It's just saying which one of these is correct. And you don't have the authority to choose which one's correct. So in this situation, I would have picked, I don't know. And obviously in real life, this is not how it works. But on the ACT English test, this is kind of how I want you to treat these situations. If you see something that, two answer choices, the only difference between them is a semicolon and a period, they're both wrong. There's something else wrong, and one of the other ones is the correct answer. Because how are you going to tell the difference between these? They're both good, right? And there's only supposed to be one right answer. So if you see this happen, just cross them both out. Because it can't be one of those. Does that make sense? Hopefully that'll help you guys kind of save yourself some time on a few questions, because a lot of the times I like to do this. And people will get bogged down for like a whole minute thinking like which one of these is better. It's neither of them. Does that make sense? Does anyone have any questions about this rule? Online, does this make sense? Yes, I'm seeing thumbs up. Good. All right, one more rule, and this is a little silly one that I hadn't known about, and I highly doubt this will come up, but I will mention it just in case because I saw it once on a test, so it's probably not impossible. And I would just call this it has a silly name, but I would call it a super comma. What the heck is a super comma? Well, I'll show you an example for it to make sense. So let's say we're talking about multiple cities you've been to. Let's say I've been to all these different places. So let's say I've been to my hometown, Sioux Falls, South Dakota. I've been to, where else will I? Omaha, that's where I go to school. And how about here, Sioux City, South Dakota? Okay. Dakota. Okay. Now, we learned a few different comma rules, right? One of the comma rules we learned is that cities and states have to be separated by commas, right? So notice I did that. Sioux Falls, comma, South Dakota. Omaha, comma, Nebraska. Sioux City, comma, South Dakota, right? But we also learned that you have to put commas in a list. And I'm listing things here, right? So I should separate each of those with a comma. So Sioux Falls, South Dakota, comma. Omaha, Nebraska, comma. And Sioux City, South Dakota. Now, just for a second, you know when you read something and there's a comma, you kind of pause, right? Let's just try to read this with the pauses. I've been to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, Omaha, Nebraska, and Sioux City, South Dakota. Do you see how choppy that is? It just sounds silly, right? Like, what are you saying? There's so many things. If I wasn't from the United States and I just looked at this, I would say like, oh, you've been to Sioux Falls, you've been to South Dakota, you've been to Omaha, you've been to Nebraska. So each of these are unique things to me, right? Because I'm reading a list. But that's not what we mean. So when you're listing things, like we do with like when we make lists with commas, when you're listing things that already have commas in them, you're actually going to use semicolons in those places. So instead of using a comma as the list, you're going to use a semicolon. It's just like a super comma, a stronger comma in this situation to try to separate your list more clearly. Does that make sense? So now if I'm reading this, it's clear to me, oh, Sioux Falls, South Dakota, Omaha, Nebraska, and Sioux City, South Dakota. Do you see kind of how that makes sense? I know it seems kind of ridiculous and this doesn't come up very often. Not often are you listing things that already have commas in them. But this just makes it a little bit easier for the reader to understand and a little bit easier for the writer to look back and understand what they meant by themselves. So maybe you'll see this rule, probably not. So don't like hang your hat on it and don't come back to me mad that you didn't see it on the test, but it's possible. It could be there. Does everyone understand this? Online, does this make sense? Okay, awesome. Very good. All right, so that's kind of all there is with semicolons. There's really only 2 uses for them on the test. So that's kind of it with those. Let's move on. Okay, now let's talk about apostrophes. How do you even spell apostrophe? Is it like ES? Who knows, whatever. And this is like if you were to turn the page upside down with a comma on it, it's like a comma hanging from the ceiling kind of thing. Now when you see these, when you see an apostrophe, you should think of 2 things. You should either think possession or ownership or a contraction, right? And a contraction is when you take 2 words, right, kind of mush them together. Like we can say I am or I'm, right? And like there's certain ones that we've kind of created with our own slang, like ain't isn't really a word, but we say it all the time, so we've kind of learned to write it like that with an apostrophe. Or can't is a good one that actually does get used a lot. I'm not going to mention contractions because I trust that we kind of know the contractions, right? If you have cannot, you can also make it can't. For the most part, in formal writing, you're not going to use those. So a lot of these passages aren't going to have contractions, excuse me. It's still possible, and it's still okay to use them depending on the tone of the writing. So if you see other contractions, it's completely fine to use them. If you're not seeing any others, just steer away from them. But I'm just going to make a brief mention of that. I'm not going to give you any rules. I kind of trust your guys' judgment with that. because we use them all the time in our everyday lives, right? So, going to give you guys the benefit of the doubt here with that. So the other thing is possession, right? And there's 4 different things I want to say specifically about possession in general. So the one rule basically is that it shows ownership or possession, right? But I'm going to give you a bunch of like sub rules here. So the first situation, let's just try a few situations, right? Okay, let's say my friend Donna. That's why it make me sound old. Did you guys have DVDs when you were kids, or are you too young for that? Yeah, we had DVD. Okay, that's good. Okay, so let's say my friend Donna is like, I don't know, just she has this movie that I really want on Blu-ray, so I'm gonna go steal her DVD. So let's say I stole. I'm not advising you to do this, by the way, but how do you say this? How do I say that this DVD is belonging to Donna? How would I do that?
With an apostrophe and an S.
Yeah, apostrophe S, right? We would read this as I stole Donna's DVD, right? Completely normal. We kind of know how to do this. Anytime you have a singular word like that, you just slap an apostrophe S on the end and that's it, right? It's not too crazy. Now let's say Donna's now mad because I stole her DVD and she wants to get back at me, so she steals our other friend's DVD. So to get back at me, let's say, Donna stole. Okay, I have this friend Chris, and she took the DVD belonging to Chris. Now how do I say it? If I want to say it belongs to Chris.
Just an apostrophe.
Just an apostrophe is what most people think, right? Because it sounds, what he said is kind of like this, right? Actually, this is still apostrophe S. This is why I mentioned this rule. Why would it be apostrophe S even if it's already, it ends in an S? Why would it be an apostrophe S? Does anyone have an idea?
It shows possession.
It shows possession. If I were to just leave it like this, it could still show possession, right? But why did I use apostrophe S instead of just an apostrophe?
Because it's not plural.
Yes, exactly. Because the word is not plural, right? So anytime it's a singular word, even if it ends in S, you're still going to put an apostrophe S. Like, think about the way you read this. Do you read this as Chris or Chris's? You can kind of hear, like, this is Chris's DVD. You're almost saying it like this, right? So you actually want to write it like this. So anytime there is a singular subject, no matter what, you're going to use an apostrophe S, even if that word ends in S, which is contrary to popular belief, right? A lot of the times you'll see people teach it like this, which that has its own place, but not with singular subjects, right? So if you have a singular, oh my gosh. If you have a singular word like Chris, still apostrophe S. Does that make sense? That might come up, so just be ready for that. Okay, now what happens if I have a plural? Okay, here's my example. I'm going to try to exaggerate this and make the sentence a little unclear on purpose. So if it doesn't make perfect sense, just roll with me here. I'm going to show you kind of why this is important, where you place your apostrophes. Okay, so there's 2 meanings to this sentence, right? Sentence says, Michael couldn't decide which of his 3 girlfriends' dresses he liked best. Okay, so let's say we used it like the first time. Hey, Michael's a good guy, right? Here he's just trying to decide his one singular girlfriend has 3 dresses and he can't decide which one he likes best, right? This is his 3 girlfriends' dresses, as in like his girlfriend has 3 dresses, right? That's fine. Now if I were to move this apostrophe and put it outside of the S, now Michael's a bad guy. There's 3 girlfriends and they're all wearing a dress and he can't decide which one he likes the most. This is not good, right? And I totally changed the meaning of this sentence just by moving the apostrophe in one place. Michael was really nice and now he's horrible and no one likes him, right? And all I did was move an apostrophe. So this sentence isn't beautiful. I understand grammatically it's kind of suspicious, but just to make the point clear that like when you have something plural, make sure you put it on the outside. If it's singular, put it on the inside. Does that make sense? So if you have a plural word like girlfriends, which is not something we use often, but girlfriends like this, plural, no apostrophe s, just apostrophe. Make sense? Online, does that make sense? Okay, awesome. Now I'm going to give you a small example that sometimes people tend to struggle. I think we've had people struggle with this in the past, so I'm going to bring it up. It may seem obvious to you, but sometimes under pressure people have trouble with stuff like this. If you have a hyphenated word or a compound word, we'll talk about that in a second later on down the road when we get to hyphens. But when you have hyphenated words like, I'll just tell you now, like brother-in-law is a hyphenated word. I don't need to capitalize that. Whoops. Let's say your brother-in-law is wearing a suit. You could say brother-in-law's suit, and that would be correct. So when you have a hyphenated word, you're not going to put it at the end of each word. We've had people in the past kind of write it like brothers-in-laws kind of thing like that. And that's not good. I'm going to quick draw an X around it so we know. You're not going to put it around each word in a hyphenated word. With hyphenated words, you just put it on the last thing. Does that make sense? I know this one seems self-explanatory, but we've had people struggle in the past, so I just try to bring it up at least once. Does this make sense online? If you have a hyphenated word, just the last word. Yeah? Cool. Okay, awesome. One more situation here with ownership that's pretty interesting. Okay, what's your name?
Matthew?
Matthew, and what's your name?
Lily?
Okay, Matthew and Lily are, let's say they're siblings at this point, and how do I want to describe this? They're like, let's say I say this. What does this mean if I put it like this? Matthew and Lily's house is beautiful. What does that mean? Go ahead, yeah.
Like they both show ownership. of
Yes, they both are owning the same house at this point, right? So if you have two subjects like this or more, and you put the apostrophe s just at the end, just on the last subject, we call that joint possession. So this is joint possession. So this is something you would use when multiple subjects, you want them all to be owning the same thing. So if all of them own the house, if it's multiple people hosting a party, like you might have tonight for a Super Bowl, it's multiple people's party, you just put the apostrophe s on the last subject. Whoever comes last in the list, it doesn't really matter. Now let's say I were to say the same thing, but they're just neighbors now. So now I say, now I would say Matthew's and Lily's houses. Now it's clear that both of them have their own house, they're neighbors or whatever, they're somehow related in some way that I'm talking about them together. But Matthew's and Lily's houses, is way different than Matthew and Lily's house, right? This is what we would call separate possession. What the heck? Separate. Does that make sense? So in one of these situations, you have joint possession, both of them possessing the same thing. Second situation, you have separate possession where they're both possessing their own thing. Does that make sense? So these are two situations I want you to be fairly familiar with because totally different, right? These mean entirely different things. So be aware if you're trying to make joint possession, then only put it at the end. If you're trying to do separate possession, put it on every noun. Online, does this make sense too? You guys got that? Yeah, nice. Okay, that's pretty much all there is with apostrophes. It's all possession. And there is, if I'm not mistaken, there's a page in your English book, your ACT 36 book in the English section, that talks about contractions. So if you are like concerned about that at all, I can find the page number and give it to you if you'd like. But otherwise, for the most part, I think we're good on contractions. You guys feel good about those? Online? You know how to do that? Yeah, okay. Cool. We'll leave that be. Alright, then let's go to dashes. Dashes and hyphens sometimes get confused as two different, or as the same thing when they're really, really different. The big difference is, I'm going to exaggerate it a little bit on the board here, but a dash is very long and a hyphen is super short. So a hyphen can go in between two words to kind of combine them. A dash is intended to be a separator. It's kind of separating thoughts. It's a larger punctuation mark. So pretty much only two things a dash is going to do. One of them, you will probably, it'll ring a bell for you, I hope. But dashes can set off non-essential or interrupting information. Hey, what does that sound like? I feel like I've heard those words before. What rule does that remind you of? Is there something that's like we've learned in the past that sounds a lot like that? You guys remember comma hugs? It's like almost the same thing, right? Comma hugs literally did the same thing. So you can call this, if you'd like, a dash hug. And it's exactly the same use. So anywhere you can use a comma hug, you have the authority to use a dash hug as well. So how is this different from a comma hug? Well, the difference there's basically two differences here. One of them is an author's choice, the other one is a grammatical choice. So one of them you kind of don't care about, the other one you absolutely do. So for one, a dash hug provides more emphasis. It's more clear of a break, it's more interrupting, it's more non-essential kind of thing. But as editors, that doesn't matter to us, right? Because who are we to decide what's more non-essential and what's more interrupting? Or so emphasis is something we don't care about as editors. The next thing we do care about. So what a dash hug can do that a comma hug cannot is that it can hug independent clauses. So what does that mean? If you have an entire sentence that you want to put in the middle of another sentence, you can do that now with dashes. You cannot do that with comma hugs. So, did everyone have time to write this down? Sorry, I'm going to erase this and give you an example. Everyone's good? Online? You guys got it down? Okay. I'm going to quick write out a few examples, and we're going to kind of do some like practice questions type of thing here. Okay. Okay, we'll start with this one. So I'm going to give you again 3 options. And this sentence reads, my preparations for the ACT, doing what the tutors said, will ensure I do well. So you can either do a dash hug, so dash there, a comma hug, we'll put commas in both spots, or I don't know. Okay, does everyone have a vote ready? How many people think it's a dash hug? How many people think it's a comma hug? How many people think I don't know? Yeah, very good. Very good. Again, this is the same situation as before, right? Both of these are grammatically sound. So as editors, we don't have the authority to choose. So C is the correct answer. Good job. All right, we'll do one more example on this specific topic and then we'll move on. Oh. I'm going to give you the same three options here. You can have a dash hug, a comma hug, or I don't know. I'll give you a second to think. The sentence reads, if my handwriting's too bad, I missed my class today. I was feeling really sick, so I didn't do the homework. Yeah, this is really confusing with all these lines kind of like going all over the place. But you're picking between, and the two spots I have there, a dash hug or a comma hug, or I don't know. Okay, does everyone have an idea of what they want to vote? Okay, how many people think it's A, a dash hug? Okay, how many people think it's B, a comma hug? Okay, and how many people think it is C? You can't pick. Okay, good. No one voted for C. That's good. This one you actually can pick, right? Now, someone who picked A, can they explain why they picked A? Go ahead. Right, so he is saying that this middle section that's being hugged is an independent clause, so you chose a dash hug. Can someone who picked B explain why they picked B? I know we had votes for both sides. Does anyone have an... Okay, it's cool if we didn't know. So A is the correct answer, yes. What he said was exactly right. Because you're hugging something that is an independent clause, that's can stand on its own, that's an entire sentence, you can't use a comma hug, it's not strong enough. So in this situation, you need to use a dash hug, not a comma hug. So that's one of the main differences between a comma and a dash hug. For the most part, they're interchangeable. In this situation, they're not. Does that make sense? Everyone get it? Online, that makes sense? Yes. Good, 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 good. Okay, so that's one rule with dashes. And I would say something like 90% of the time, that might be a little high. 80% of the time, you see a dash, there'll be another one. As in they're using a dash hug. So a lot of the times, if you're looking on the test and you see a dash, maybe look for another one. They're probably intending on asking you about a dash hug. There is one other thing that could happen, and this one sometimes can get a little bit subjective too, so I'd tread lightly with this one. But using a dash, you can add words to the end of a sentence after a clear break in flow. Now here's the subjective part, right? What's a clear break in flow? It's kind of hard to tell sometimes, but this they actually do consider as objective, not subjective. It's something that you can feel. And the way that I would handle this is, it's kind of like you're going to hear a sentence go and you'll hear a pause and then like something that just keeps going. Like you'll clearly be able to tell like this is a sentence, this is where I'm supposed to stop. Oh, and also this. Like a lot of the times you'll hear, oh, and this. Or like PS. You know, it's kind of like an addition to the sentence, something extra. So let's say I am an Eagles player today and I'm like really sad. We're in the fourth quarter. We're never going to win this game, I'm saying. And this is fine as a sentence, right? I could just end it here. Oh, we're never going to win this game. And then an idea pops in my head. oh, well, unless I go out there and like hurt their best player. So now I'm saying like, unless, I'm just going to add a by the way phrase here too. So you can almost hear this, right? You can hear this is a clear break in flow. I've ended the sentence, oh, we're never going to win this game. Oh, unless, of course, their best player gets hurt. Can you kind of hear how there's like a break and then, oh, wait, actually also this? Does that make sense? So I know it's not super objective. It's kind of hard to tell. So they're not going to ask about this a ton, and that's why I said for the most part, if you see a dash, there's another one. For the most part. This does happen, though, so I will mention it. And that's kind of how I think of it still. It's like you're walking forward, you stop, and then there's like a jolt forward. We're like, oh, wait, actually also this. Does that make sense? Online, does this make sense? I know it's not the cleanest in the world. Yeah? Okay. Okay, good. That's kind of all there is with dashes. Now, all that's left is hyphens, and there's only really a few rules with hyphens. Think of hyphens as tiny dashes, basically. They're like half a dash. And these aren't really going to be used as entire sentence punctuation. This is kind of inner word punctuation. So it's a much smaller scale. And these are extremely self-explanatory. There's not really much thinking you're going to have to do with these. You'll see the rule and you'll immediately know if it's hyphenated or not. And these are like little, I'm going to draw it exaggeratory, but it's like a tiny little dash. Okay, there's 5 different uses for these. One of them a little more tricky than the rest. The other 4 are extremely self-explanatory, so I'll start with those. So the first thing is when you're connecting numbers to words, have to use a hyphen. And there's certain phrases that kind of fit into this. So let's say I'm looking at this huge building in front of me, and I'm trying to describe its height. I would call that a 320 random number foot building. So I had a number and a word, and to connect them I had to use a hyphen, right? And this works also if you spell out the number. So like when you were talking about age, if there's like this little kid standing next to me and he's 8, I would say 8-year-old kid. So again, we connected a number to a word, so we had to use a hyphen. That becomes a hyphenated word. Does that make sense? And now if, let's say we're talking about something that belongs to the 8-year-old kid, we wouldn't say 8-years-old's kid, right? This would be 8-year-old's something, right? So we're just going to put the apostrophe at the end if we're doing possession on these, like we talked about earlier. Does this make sense? So anytime you're connecting numbers and words, you should use hyphens. Good? That makes sense online? Yeah. Okay. So that's the first one. So, that's fine, I'll get it. The next thing you can do is if you have any great relative or an in-law, those words are just automatically hyphenated. So if you have a great grandpa, that would be great hyphen grandpa. If you have a sister-in-law, that would be sister hyphen in hyphen law. These are hyphenated words, always. Great relatives and in-laws will always be hyphenated. Does that make sense? This is kind of how these rules for the most part go. They're not like super, you don't have to think super hard. It's just like, oh, great relative needs a hyphen. Oh, in-law needs a hyphen. I'm seeing numbers and words, needs a hyphen. It's like kind of, for the most part, that's kind of how they go. Did everyone have time to write this down? You guys good online? Yeah. All right. Third rule. Any compound word, words with self. There's about a million of these. Just some of the examples I can think of off the top of my head would be like self-esteem is one of them. self-esteem, maybe self-employed, maybe self-directed. I think I wrote one down too. Those are the only ones I wrote down. Okay, well. But yeah, basically any word that starts with self like this, anytime you hear two different words combined and self is the first part of it, it's gonna have a hyphen. That makes sense? Again, these are like really flat and self-explanatory. There's not much explaining I can do to help. Does this make sense online? Ooh, someone hit a pre-thumbs up before I even asked the question. That's crazy. Okay. Fourth rule. This happens a decent amount actually in English passages. So especially recently, I don't know why they've been talking about this, but when you're spelling out fractions, it's okay, especially if you have huge fractions when you're writing them, to write them like this. If you're like that's acceptable, right? Because you're not, if you're writing, it's ridiculous to write that out sometimes. But if you're spelling out a smaller one, like 2/3, you should write it as 2 hyphen thirds. Does that make sense? So basically, the general rule of thumb is any number bigger than 10, you should probably leave as a number. Any number smaller than that, you should probably spell out. It's a random rule of thumb. This isn't like super grammatical terms, so it's okay to adjust that a little bit depending on what the authors are doing. But with fractions, for the most part, they're going to ask you to write them like this, because it's not super often in a piece of like English literature you're going to get a random fraction like that. This is more for like actual math things. If they're writing about math, then fine, but otherwise, if you want to say something like 2/3 of people, probably going to use smaller fractions. You're not going to say like 27 to 140 once or whatever, 141sts. Does this make sense? Yeah, okay, cool. Last one. This is the one that can be a little bit tricky for people sometimes, so just want to put that out there. Sometimes it's a little confusing. These are called combination words. And they're going to, so including a prepositional phrase. What's a prepositional phrase? A preposition is like is, on, of, those type of words, right? These little tiny prepositions. So if you have words that include a prepositional phrase, these are kind of like sayings almost. They're almost like little sayings. Like for example, think of one with in. One in a million. One in a million. This is a combination word with a prepositional phrase, right? Or maybe down in the dumps is another one. Down in the dumps. There's an in there. Maybe a jack of all trades is another one. Jack of all trades. Right? There's a. And then you could have like has anyone heard Johnny on the spot? People have heard of that? Yeah. That's another one. I didn't know if that was like a spot. That's another hyphenated phrase with a prepositional phrase inside of it. Does that make sense? I know this is kind of hard to just immediately recognize and feel like, oh yeah, duh, that needs hyphens. You won't always feel it that way. But these are kind of like just little sayings we use. I almost think of it that way. They're like little sayings, and they have a preposition in them, so they have to be hyphenated. Does this kind of make sense? Yeah? Okay. Cool. If no one has any other questions about this so far, that's all of punctuation. That's literally all of the punctuation you could possibly see on the test. That's 13% of the test. Done. Easy. Next time I'm with you guys, we'll talk about the next part of that breakdown I had. This will just be like grammar. A bunch of different grammar questions. I call them golden grammar rules. There's 6 of them that I think are way more important than everything else. Obviously, I can cover all of the punctuation areas. I can't cover all of the grammar. But I have 6 that are way more important than everything else and that cover extensively a lot of different things. So we'll discuss 6 rules next time. We've got a little bit of time here, so let's go ahead and pull out the blue 10 practice tests book and flip to practice test 10. It'll be somewhere near the back. I'm going to go grab my book as well. I'll be right back. Okay, it should be like 780 something. Nope, a little before that. 773. Okay, online, if you guys didn't see, it was the big blue practice book that we have, this one. Page 773 is where I want you to go. I'm going to set just a timer. I'm going to make it so that you guys can't see it for now, just so you get like a overall feel of how long these kind of take. And I'm just going to let it rock for like 10 minutes. Normally you'd have a little less than that. You'd have like 9 minutes to finish a passage. I'm going to let it go a little bit longer just to give anyone time who needs it. But just go through this passage so we can get a feel of like what the actual test looks like. This is kind of what practice passages are. We'll talk about the answers, and we'll see if we can apply any of these punctuation rules we just learned. If you don't know how to do a question, totally cool. We're going to cover how to do everything. So eventually you'll know how to do every single question, but pretend like it's a real test. Guess if you have to. I'll give you a warning with like a minute left. Is everyone ready? Okay, 773 if you forgot. And go ahead. Okay, you got like a minute 30 left here. All right, that was about 10 minutes, a little bit under. I gave you like 9:40. So we'll quick go through. I'll read the answers to you, and then I'll point out a few things I would be looking at across this test based on what we've learned. And then if anyone has any questions about one, we'll quick do that before we get out of here. Well, before I get out of here. You guys still have another class to do. But okay, number 1 is D. Number 2 is F. Number 3 is A. Number 4 is H. Number 5 is C. 6 G. 7 D. 8 G. 9 C. 10 J. 11 B. 12 F. 13 B. 14 F. And 15 B. So questions, like, really quickly, I'm just going to have you look at like number 6 and number 14. Those are example of some of those. Do you remember the first day we talked about like easy questions and hard questions? 6 and 14 would fit into like that hard category. We'll discuss exactly how to attack those later. So if you have questions on those, feel free to ask them now, but we will actually talk about how to handle them. The really like punctuation heavy questions here, one obviously was a comma question, right? Number 5 kind of had a punctuation element to it. Number 7 definitely was. 12 talked a little bit there about punctuation. So those ones are clear punctuation questions. And with great understandings of the rules we talked about over the last 2 times, those questions will become like super duper easy. It's of course okay if you don't get them today. But by the time we actually take the test, hopefully those are pretty easy for you guys. Did anyone have one that they're like, what the heck, how is that the right answer? Does anyone have any questions? Feel free to shout them out.
Number 8.
Number 8? Okay, let's talk about number 8. Okay, reading the whole sentence, it says, they studied yellow fever in Cuba, where they were infecting soldiers fighting in the Spanish-American War at quite a rate. I'm just confused. If I read that, like, what is they? Were, like, the researchers, like, going there, the doctors, and, like, actually infecting them? Or was the disease infecting them at alarming rates? Like, what's happening? I think what they meant was that a disease was infecting all of the soldiers. So I would want to make that clear. I wouldn't say they or it or anything. So I would probably pick G here. Was that the right answer? I don't remember. I would have said G, though, yeah. Because you want to make clear what the disease is, or, like, what exactly is happening there. They is kind of misguided and kind of confusing. So I would make it clear the disease, yeah. Does that make sense? Why G instead of...
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just a little bit unclear the way it's written of, like, who's they? Like, what's going on here? So I would say the disease, yeah. Did anyone have any other ones? Everything made sense for the most part on this? Okay, and it's completely fine if you didn't get all of them there. We'll talk more in depth about how to answer each type of question going forward. But I just wanted you guys to get a feel of, like, that's kind of what the timing will look like. That's kind of what the actual test looks like if you haven't seen it before. So hopefully that made you a little more familiar. And then next time we'll get to grammar. Sound good? All right.